Tayeb Salih's Season of Migration to the North, 1969, is a landmark of post-colonial Arabic literature and widely considered one of the most important novels of the 20th century. Originally published in Arabic in 1966 and translated into English in 1969, the novel explores the complex entanglements of identity, colonialism, power, sexuality, and cultural conflict through the story of two men, the nameless narrator and the mysterious Mustafa Said, whose lives mirror each other across geographies and histories. Set in a Sudanese village on the banks of the Nile, the narrative unfolds in the aftermath of British colonial rule. It confronts the lingering psychological and cultural impact of imperialism on both colonizer and colonized. Through its haunting, elliptical structure and richly symbolic language, the novel critiques Orientalist fantasies and interrogates the myth of a unified post-colonial self. Return of the narrator. The unnamed narrator returns to his home village in Sudan after studying in England for 7 years. Upon his return, he is struck by both the familiar beauty of his homeland and a sense of dislocation. He is greeted with joy by the villagers, who see him as a symbol of success and modernity. Initially, the narrator hopes to reintegrate into village life and help build the new post-independence Sudan. However, his vision is disrupted when he meets Mustafa Said, a reserved and enigmatic man who lives quietly with his wife, Hasna, and their 2 sons in the village. Over time, the narrator becomes curious about Mustafa's origins and discovers a dark and astonishing past. The Confession of Mustafa Said. One night, during a flood, Mustafa reveals his story. A brilliant Sudanese boy, he was sent to Cairo and then to London for education. There, he became a celebrated economist but lived a double life as a seducer of white women, exploiting Orientalist fantasies and ultimately driving several women to madness or suicide. He married one woman, Jean Morris, a cold and controlling figure, whom he eventually murdered. He was tried and imprisoned before returning to Sudan. Mustafa describes his relationships in cold, clinical detail, framing them as a battle between East and West, colonized and colonizer, man and woman. His erotic conquests were, in his mind, acts of revenge against British imperialism, but they also exposed a deep psychological fragmentation. After his confession, Mustafa disappears during a flood and is presumed dead, though his body is never found. His house and legacy are left in the care of the narrator. The narrator's crisis. The narrator becomes obsessed with Mustafa's story. He reads Mustafa's hidden manuscripts and reflects on the parallels between their lives, both educated in the West, both caught between cultures. The narrator is haunted by Mustafa's legacy and by the realization that colonialism has left profound psychological scars on his people. Meanwhile, Mustafa's widow, Hasna, is pressured by village elders to remarry. She resists, insisting that no one else can understand her as Mustafa did. The narrator tries to intervene, but Hasna is eventually forced to marry Wad Reyes, an older, lecherous man. Not long after the marriage, Hasna kills Wad Reyes and herself in a shocking act of violence. This tragedy further destabilizes the narrator, who is filled with guilt and helplessness. The novel ends with the narrator drifting in the Nile, shouting for help, caught between life and death, past and future, unable to decide whether to swim to shore or succumb to the current. Character analysis. The narrator. The narrator is a well-educated Sudanese man who serves as both a character and a lens through which we see the world. His return from England mirrors the experience of many post-colonial elites who struggled to reconcile their Western education with their native identity. He is introspective, sensitive, and often paralyzed by indecision. His attempt to understand Mustafa's life leads him to confront his own complicity in the structures of power and silence. By the end, his moral and psychological crisis reflects the larger crisis of post-colonial identity. Mustafa Said. Mustafa is the novel's most enigmatic and symbolic character. A genius and a seducer, he represents both the triumph and trauma of colonial education. He weaponizes Western desire for the exotic, other, turning himself into a living Orientalist fantasy, only to reveal its destructive consequences. Mustafa's relationships with white women are not just personal. They are political and symbolic, mirroring the colonial dynamic of dominance, fantasy, and violence. Yet, he is also a deeply damaged man, unable to find peace or love, ultimately consumed by the very system he seeks to subvert. Hasna bint Mahmud. Hasna is a powerful, though underdeveloped, character who suffers at the intersection of gender, culture, and colonial aftermath. Trapped between societal expectations and personal trauma, her violent act of resistance, killing her rapist husband and herself, is both a critique of patriarchal violence and a symbol of the limited choices available to women in post-colonial societies. Wad Reyes. An older, traditional village man, Wad Reyes embodies the persistence of patriarchal authority and entitlement. His marriage to Hasna is symbolic of the continued oppression of women and the failure of post-colonial reforms to address gender injustice. Major themes. 1. Colonialism and its psychological aftermath. At its core, the novel is a post-colonial critique of the psychological impact of British imperialism. Mustafa Saeed's life is shaped by the colonial system that educates him, exoticizes him, and ultimately alienates him. His sexual relationships become metaphors for colonial domination, with Mustafa playing both victim and avenger. Colonialism, in Salih's view, is not just political or economic. It is existential, altering how individuals perceive themselves and others. 2. East and West. A troubled encounter. The novel stages a dialogue between East and West, represented by Sudan and England, tradition and modernity, mysticism and rationalism. Neither side escapes critique. While the West is portrayed as hypocritical and destructive, the East is shown as complicit in its own submission, and unable to protect its vulnerable, e.g., Hasna. Salih rejects simplistic binaries. Instead, he explores the ambivalence, attraction, and repulsion that characterize post-colonial identity. 3. Identity, fragmentation, and doubling. The narrator and Mustafa are doubles, mirroring each other across generations and geographies. Both are caught between cultures, both educated in the West, both questioning their place in the world. Their duality reflects the split identity of the colonized subject, neither fully African nor European, always in between. Mustafa tries to dominate the West through seduction. The narrator tries to reconcile the two worlds. Neither fully succeeds. 4. Gender, sexuality, and power. Sexual relationships in the novel are never merely romantic, they are power struggles. Mustafa's conquests of Western women are framed as a reversal of colonial desire, but they also expose his emotional sterility and misogyny. Women, both white and Sudanese, are often symbolic objects, used to explore larger themes but rarely given full interiority. Hasna's suicide murder is one of the few moments when a woman asserts control, but at the cost of her life. 5. Silence, memory, and the unknowable. Mustafa's house is filled with locked rooms, hidden manuscripts, and unspoken truths. These symbolize the fragmentation of history, the difficulty of telling coherent narratives in the post-colonial world. The narrator's search for meaning is continually thwarted by silence. Mustafa's silence, Hasna's silence, and the village's complicity. The novel suggests that some traumas defy explanation, and some truths are better left buried, or else faced at great cost. Narrative style and structure. Salih's prose is lyrical, elliptical, and deeply symbolic. The novel unfolds in a nonlinear fashion, with flashbacks, confessions, and internal monologues. The lack of a clear resolution reflects the incomplete nature of post-colonial transformation. The structure mimics oral storytelling traditions, with repetition, digression, and a circular form that ends where it begins, at the Nile, with the narrator caught in the current. The use of first-person narration deepens the psychological intimacy but also creates ambiguity. The narrator is not entirely reliable. He suppresses, hesitates, and confesses uncertainty, making the reader complicit in the act of interpretation. Symbolism. The Nile represents both life and death, tradition and modernity. It is a place of return, drowning, and rebirth. Mustafa's house symbolizes the hidden legacies of colonialism, the rooms locked away, the memories repressed, the truths too dangerous to reveal. London, a symbol of the colonial metropole, it is both seductive and destructive, shaping and undoing the colonized subject. The desert and the village stand for home, stability, and rootedness, but also stagnation, patriarchy, and resistance to change. Conclusion. Season of Migration to the North is a masterpiece of post-colonial literature, a haunting, richly layered novel that explores the enduring consequences of imperialism, the complexity of cross-cultural identity, and the limits of personal and political redemption. Tayeb Salih avoids easy moral binaries, instead presenting a world of ambiguity, irony, and haunting beauty. His portrayal of Mustafa Said and the unnamed narrator reveals the psychological depth of colonial entanglement, where resistance can mirror domination, and liberation often comes at a cost. The novel's enduring relevance lies in its refusal to offer closure. Like the narrator caught in the river's current, we are left suspended, between past and future, self and other, memory and forgetting. In this way, Season of Migration to the North remains a profound meditation on what it means to live in the aftermath of empire.